Well,
okay, great.
Apologies to all, and a thank you to you, Rick. Also, a welcome and good afternoon, and a thank you to all you who had the patience and were able to join. An outline of the presentation today. We'll start off talking about the N-Wave error, the beginning, and the US database. Talk about the SST and its demise. We'll talk about the quest for overland supersonic flight and the defining of the research priorities that would allow for that. We'll talk about the shape sonic boom demonstrator. We'll exit the N-Wave error, enter the signature shaped area, and talk about shaping. Then we'll introduce the X-59, talk about its relevance as far as the full-scale vehicle's concerned, the remaining challenges, and when they might be realized. Again, address the need for overland supersonic flight, the new entries, how it might affect them, the three of them, boom, Arion, and spike. We'll talk Concorde and its demise and its importance with regard to the new entries, and then some closing remarks. Where did first start? Well, Chuck Yeager said that he was the first in 1947 with breaking the barrier at Mach 1.7 at 42,000 feet, and the ground crew reporting hearing a boom. A week before that, North American test pilot George Welch said he put his F-86 into a dive, and he produced a boom on the ground that his ground crew observed. Well, there's still discussion about those two, but it doesn't matter because 3 years later, the Air Force introduced their Century Series fighters, you know, the F-101, the F-104, and so forth. So they were able to go supersonic and level flight. Take a look at the shockwave formations around an airplane. Here's a T-38 supersonic flight. Notice the shocks above and below, and notice they're starting to kind of coalesce as they propagate away from the airplane. Let's take a look at that in profile here. Here we're looking at aircraft supersonic flight, shocks above and below. The shocks kind of go all the way to the ground, and then they reflect off the ground. In close in the near field is the complicated signatures because of the number of shocks. You progress out the midfield, they tend to coalesce. There are fewer, and at the ground, we end up with two shocks, okay? Thus, the N-wave and the N-wave airplane. This signature is defined by an overpressure, a period, and can't see it here, but as a rise time. Keep in mind, this becomes important when we talk about the design of the X-59. Now, when this signature passes over you, the ear responds to rapid changes in pressure. So it hears this shock as a boom, boom. Thus, when they say they hear a sonic boom, it's usually a boom, boom. Let's take a look at this now with the aircraft coming out of the picture here. Here we have altitude 100, 200,000 feet, and let's say Concorde's flying at 60,000 feet. This is level this to one side of the track going out 80 miles in here. Okay, these are the ray paths along which the shocks travel. Okay, so the shocks that travel underneath the aircraft are made up of these, shown by these solid lines. Okay, they go out and they hit the ground, and this is the primary, so-called primary boom area. Okay, what happens as they hit the ground, they refract back up like so. These get turned. All right, just cut off, these get turned. Why do they get turned downward? Well, if you look at the temperature profile with altitude, okay, here's normal temperature lapse rate up to the tropopause, about 36,000 feet, constant to 80, and then it increases in the stratosphere. Likewise, there are winds that play a role in this. So when these go up, they see that temperature increase and they bend that down again. So there's a boom region here, and then there's a void, and then there's a secondary booms. Let's take a look at that in another view. Let's assume this is Concorde. He takes off, climbs, accelerates, goes through, and then he lands. This is the primary boom area. These are the booms that you observe, okay? And they're usually order of 1.5 to 2 PSF. It's interesting because the first thing that happens when the aircraft travels from subsonic to supersonic speed is a focus boom that occurs. You can't get away from it. I mean, it's there. we can minimize it. But what happens is it forms a pressure buildup area that this dark line looks like an inverted horseshoe, where it might be a thickness of 200 to 400 feet. These overpressures are on the order of 2 to 4 times what they'd be if you just flew normal set 11. Okay. Then in cruise, okay, the booms are max on the track. They look like N waves, and then as you go out laterally, you get to the cutoff, and they're very low frequency. They sound like distant thunder. Here. These booms are observed like a minute, minute and a half after the aircraft goes by. Then we have this void, and then we have these secondary booms. These booms are observed 12 to 15 minutes after the airplane goes by. Their amplitudes are about an order of magnitude less than those on the track. And they're very low frequency, like 10 hertz. So outdoors, you probably wouldn't observe them, but indoors, you would observe the motion associated with the shaking of the structure. It's interesting. When Concorde gets ready to land in the US, he has to stop some 250 miles or so from the landing point in order to keep this over-the-top boom from hitting the ground, because the rule says you cannot place a sonic boom on US soil. Take a look at some of the signatures we measured, 20 aircraft.
Hey,
and it's just
Dominic, real quick.
Yes.
Dominic, can you close out that window at the bottom? It's covering up some of the pictures as they go by. The little settings window at the bottom of your screen.
Oh, okay.
There's a little X on the bottom right.
Okay.
Yes. Thank you.
Is that better?
Yes.
Okay. So anyhow, here's a number of signatures we've measured: the F-104, the SR-71 at 80,000 feet, Concorde, and the shuttle orbiter on re-entry before landing at about 70,000 feet. And here's the orbiter at about Mach 5 at 114,000 feet. We actually measured the signature from the orbiter at Mach 23 at 252,000 feet. But notice they're all N waves, under nice quiescent atmospheric conditions. How come I can't change? There you go. I can't change my, oh, here we go. Okay, so how good were we back in those days? In predicting. We didn't have the powerful codes that exist today. But let's take a look at the SR-71 at 3 altitudes, 35, 50, and 80,000 feet. Not bad, not too bad, okay? If you look laterally, here's an F-104 at 52,000 feet at Mach 2. We didn't do a bad job. These are the signatures, and notice they're, kind of pretty much the same on each side. Here's a lower altitude of the F-104 for 4 flights. Again, we didn't do too bad a job. Trouble is, that's not the regular, that's not the standard. The atmosphere played a significant role in changing the shape of these signatures. We found this out in '61 during tests at Edwards. Here we're looking at altitude as a function of temperature, and this is just 2 soundings. Okay, temperature sounding. The black is the one that was in the morning, and this is opens one in the afternoon. Well, in the morning, the desert floor is cooled down, everything is quiescent. We have a strong inversion. We make measurements. We always get nice clean N waves. As the day goes on, surface heats up. You get this superadiabatic collapse rate. You get a lot of thermal activity, gusts, little dust doubles. And when we do the flight, we get everything from a peak to a rounder to a normal. To demonstrate that, if we take a look, I have an 8,000 foot array here. I'll get myself out of the way.
Dom, I think you muted yourself.
Okay, in the mornings on this, when we flew with QueSST, we had nice steady measurements here, and there's the predicted with the dashed line. In the afternoon, look, it's kind of cyclic in nature. Okay, so we have a statistical problem. And with 40 years, we took all of the data we had from these 5 aircraft, some 1,600 flights and over 12,000 data samples, and we put together a probability distribution of equaling or exceeding the measured overpressure divided by the predicted overpressure for the flight conditions in the standard atmosphere. And this is what we get. And what it says is 50% of the time you're going to have an overpressure that's equal to or greater than what you predict or what you designed for. Also says here, like 1 time out of 1,000, you're going to get a boom that's at least maybe 2.3, 2.4 times greater than you predicted or designed for. And this, of course, is the histogram that goes with it. This kind of summary of the US database, a little busy, but we'll go through it pretty quick here. These are the test programs. These are the participants, NASA, FAA, Air Force, so forth. And these are the decades, starting from the 50s, okay, that these activities took place. And obviously, during the SST era, right in here in the mid-60s, a lot of activity went on. When it got canceled, it kind of died off a little bit on Apollo, and then some work on shuttle. Air Force had some work on military operating areas and getting data for environmental impact statements. Then it kind of quieted down until we got to the shaped sonic boom demonstrator, and we then began into the X-59 design. This gives you an idea of the overpressure range that we covered. We're talking here about the programs, and this is overpressure that goes out to about 150 pounds per square foot. Most of the community tests were done, 4 PSF or less. This was an interesting one, 120 PSF. Back in the late 50s, TAC was interested in whether or not the sonic boom could be used as a tactical weapon, to clear landmines or inert electronics that would fire missiles and so forth in there. So we flew aircraft down to 50 feet supersonically. The Air Force went one better and went to 144 PSF in their Tonopah 2 tests. We did some tests on effects on light aircraft, and then the FAA really banged them pretty good to find out when residential structures really get damaged, what overpressure. Here we're taking a look, move this guy again, taking a look at overpressures from 0 to 6 as a function of altitude all the way up to 600,000 feet. Here it's beginning at 20,000 feet. We have small aircraft, the 104. In this mix of big aircraft, we have the B-58, SR-71, B-70, Concorde, and even the shuttle orbiter. They're going all the way out to about 180,000 feet. This is not a prediction, but just a boundary. These are the booms that are associated with the ascent of the Saturn and of the shuttle. And the pressures that we measure here are not from the vehicle itself, but from the great big plume that exists behind it at those altitudes. So let's talk a little about the supersonic transport program. The story that goes, one of the stories is that the Pan American CEO found out that the British and the French were putting together, this is the early 60s, a Concorde supersonic transport. So he went to the White House and he said, hey, if I don't see a US SST that I can buy, I'm going to have to buy Concorde. Thus started the SST program. Well, there were 3 entries. There was Boeing, and there was North American and Lockheed. Now, North American thought they had an edge because they based it on the XB-70 and they had flight information on that. Lockheed thought they had an edge too because they had the A-11, A-12, SR-71, and they thought probably they had an edge on that. Boeing never built a supersonic airplane. until they, tied in with McDonnell Douglas in there. Well, all of these were looking at Mach 2.7 to Mach 3. They were looking at ranges at, more than 4,000 miles. And passengers, maybe 270 to 300. Boeing won the contract. They went with the sweep wing design because they wanted to be able to make the airport noise. They wanted to have good low-speed aerodynamics, takeoff, climb off also. Well, what they found was the weights start really creeping up on them there. And I guess what they forgot was NASA studies sometime before showed that anytime you design an airplane with a variable sweep, you're going to pay for the weighted two wings. So they abandoned this and they went to the fixed wing configuration. Still having a problem with weights, but in addition to that, about this time oil prices were going up. There were those saying, this thing burns twice the fuel that's subsonic, and on the other side of the fence, they were saying, yeah, but we'll get there in half the time, so it's a wash. In any case, those two things combined with the fact that it didn't find community acceptance, as shown here. During the time those studies were going on, there were flights over Oklahoma City for 6 months from February to July of '64. 8 booms a day, 24/7, rain or shine. And this is what they found. Here we're looking at the percent of population highly annoyed, and this is a this is a measure of loudness. It's a day-night C-weighted level. Okay, this is a curve put together by the American Noise Standard Institute and the Committee on Higher Hearing and Bioacoustics, and this is the average, okay, of impulsive type noises. Okay. Of course, sonic booms and, the noise around military bases, explosions and cannon fire and so forth in there. These are some of the earlier tests that were done in St. Louis, and this is a French test in anticipation of Concorde. Oklahoma City started out at about 1.7 PSF and went down to 1.3. Well, when you're talking about highly annoyed, some 15 to 20%, you lost the battle. In addition to that, there was concern for induced damage. It looked something like this. Here you have the number of incidents of damage, and here you have overpressure. And let's say this is a stud wall here. Okay, all it says is that, the higher the pressure, the more incidents of damage. They designed the SST cruise for 1.5 PSF and thought, well, that's a pretty good spread away. But the atmospheric effects that scatter the booms, okay, involved the crossover here where you had the incipient type damage in there. So when it canceled the program, a little bit of work still continued in aircraft shaping here with wing plan forms. They kind of continued with some of the previous studies that were done. And then DARPA, with their quiet supersonic platform, was looking for a vehicle that had 3/10 overpressure and could go 6,000 miles in there. There were also some studies that were funded or considered exotic concept, exotic in the sense that a number of them didn't obey the rules of physics, okay, the laws of physics. One had to do with altering the airstream so that you look like you have a longer body, and thus you have a ramp here instead of the sharp does. There was also microwave focusing, where you kind of build up to the first shock. They had a forward swept keel that also did the same thing, increase rise time. And of course, you had Dr. Redhorst, who was really going to eliminate the boom. Well, Dr. Christine Darden at that time finally said enough of this. She headed up the supersonic activities here at Langley for NASA. And she said enough of this. She went ahead, called together 80 sonic boom experts, national, international, from academia, industry, and from government, and said, hey, you've got 3 days. I want you to come up with the research priorities that are necessary to provide for civilian overland supersonic flight. They did, came up with 2. Establishing what the criteria is for an acceptable waveform, seeing if you can design a viable vehicle with that waveform, and having a waveform that's going to be less influenced by the atmosphere. These are great, but I contended that they needed another one for it, and that is to demonstrate the persistence of a shape signature to the ground in the real atmosphere. Well, it's a hard sell because everybody, including myself, said, look, it's like gravity, okay? Theory shows it will, wind tunnel projections show it will. And I said, but nobody's going to commit. No airframer or propulsion guy would commit to supersonics unless it's demonstrated. Well, it took 10 years, but with DARPA and their QSP program, we were able, North America, north of Grumman and Eagle, were able to convince them with a proposal we had to do the demonstration. And it turned out to be a pretty convenient operation. We found that the F5E and the F5F, the difference was almost 4 feet, which was the distance that we needed to modify the F3, okay, to give us a shape signature. The way we did that is, if you take a look at the equivalent area distribution of the F5E as a function of distance along the fuselage, it builds up like so, okay? And every time you have a little change in slope, you have a shock there. All right, this defines the front shock, and this, of course, defines the back. We didn't do anything back here. So what we did is we took that, we lengthened it, that 40 inches or so, smoothed out this area of development, didn't do anything back here. Flew the 2 airplanes, same altitude, same Mach number, one 45 seconds behind the other. Here's the signature we got. This is over pressure, and this is period. The F5E came by with the N wave. Okay, then came the modified F5E or the SSBJ, Shape Sonic Boom Demonstrator. We got the flat top. Once this was proven, things really began to get stimulated. In fact, I think this really led to the development of the X-59. Work went on looking for the right kind of a shape signature. They used the 2 facilities at Langley. This one produced the outdoor boom simulation with the speakers. Okay, indoors. Subject sat here and made judgments that allowed this. As far as the indoor situation, they made use of this structure that simulated a residential living room. This is where all of the devices, speakers, and so forth that produce the stimuli that is experienced when people are indoors. Here you're looking inside. Okay, these are subjects that are making ratings. And the 3 cues that you get when you're indoor are simulated by those speakers. First is the audible, then there's the vibratory, and then there's the visual, where you see things shaking on the shelves and so forth. So what's so great about the shape signature? Well, let's look at it. Here's 2 signatures that have the same amplitude and the same period, okay? This is the near N wave, and this one has this 15 millisecond ramp time on the rise time. If you take a look at the perceived level, which is the measure of loudness, there's a 10 dB difference. Pretty significant. Why is that so? Well, let's look at the envelope of the spectrum of these 2 signatures. Look like so. Here's dB against frequency. Okay, here's the envelope of the spectrum for an N wave, dB per octave. And here it is for the shape signature right here. It goes down 8 dB and then 12. Well, if you look at the outdoor response, which is really the hearing range, from maybe 30 all the way up beyond 10,000 cycles, it's a tremendous reduction in there. Even indoors, okay, where you have the other 2 cues, you know, the motion, vibration, and the visuals, you get a benefit. So, with that in mind, work began on the X-59. And here's an early version. Now we're looking here at the near field, say a signature that's about 2 body lengths away from the vehicle. We're looking at pressure, and we're looking here at distance along of the fuselage. What we see is we see a buildup that gives you very sharp shocks in here, and then expansion, and then the tail wave. The reason for these sharp shocks is because anytime you have a shock with a rapid pressure recovery behind it, it decays much, much faster than it propagates forward. So at the ground, what you have here again is overpressure, and here's period. You have this kind of a signature. Yeah, she's almost sinusoidal. Down at the tail shock and recompression, little more difficult time, not quite as smooth, because that's the toughest part of it. I mean, doing the front part is easy because all you got up here is volume. But back in here, you've got volume, you got lift, you got the inlet flow shocks, you got the tail. It's tough. But they continued on, and they came up with the X-59 to put an end to the sonic boom in-wave error and beginning of the sonic thumps. Now, it's going to have in cruise, it's going to have a 3/10 overpressure, and it's going to have noise of 75 PLDB, which we think is going to find community acceptance. Give you an idea of the difference. Concorde had an overpressure of 2 in cruise, beginning cruise, and then 102 PLDB. Now, a couple of things. One, this does not represent the design of a supersonic business jet. This, to me, was a boombox. Its design purpose is to fly at Mach 1.4 at 55,000 feet and generate that kind of a loudness level for the people on the ground. Incidentally, to keep the cost down, it's made up of parts from the F-16, from the F-5, T-38, even from the F-117. So let's take a look at this, okay, in terms of those 2 major concerns that we had before. Recall this plot. Population highly annoyed against this metric, okay? Here's where the Oak City tests were. Okay, Concorde was up here. Remember, 15-20%. We're down here now, less than 5%. Regarding the induced damage, recall number of incidents, overpressure, and this was sidewall damage curve. All right, there's a design of the SST, and you remember the big distribution of pressures, and this was the incipient damage. Now we're way over here, okay, and much tighter distribution because the signature is not as affected by turbulence. So you say, yeah, but you're talking about a vehicle that's 96 feet long and 30,000 pounds. Is that going to elicit the same response in the community as a full-scale airplane that might be 200 feet long, 200,000 pounds? The answer is yes. Take a look. Here's a signature, say from an aircraft, 90 feet long, half a pound overpressure, and 100 millisecond period. And it's got a rise time, so its PL comes out to be 75. Here's a full scale, 200 feet long, a delta P of 1, and a period of 200. And it has the same PL. Why is that? If you double the overpressure, you got double the rise time, you'll end up with the same PL. Let's look at the envelope of the spectrum. Here again, dB against frequency. Here's the envelope for the subsonic, the subscale vehicle. And here's the one for the full scale. Well, if you're looking at the outdoor response, we'll elicit exactly the same as if you flew the full scale. Likewise, if you talk about residential structures, where the frequencies of concern are from 10 to 40 hertz, we'll also do the same. And bear in mind, these tests are aimed primarily at residential structures. Now, when you get to the big box stores like Walmart's, the subscale wouldn't excite it as efficiently as the full-scale vehicle. So let's assume that, okay, we've got the cruise thing pretty well in hand. What are the other things that need to be done, not only to the X-59, but to future vehicles? if they're going to fly over land. First of all, the focus boom during transition and the higher levels during climb to cruise and its descent levels do not significantly exceed cruise PLDVs. We still want to quantify the atmospheric effects on low boom shape signatures, and of course need to complete the requirement for the activities for regulatory change. In addition to the boom, which is a toughie, another toughie is the airport community noise, not so much for the X-59, but for the future vehicles. In fact, even the current participants. Takeoff and climb out landing approach levels must meet the current rules for subsonic airplanes. No getting around it. But the civil supersonic transport shouldn't be bound to the operating rules written for subsonic. They just don't want to fly that way. They're not designed that way. And of course, on emissions, obviously, you're going to have to meet the current emission standards. I've often been asked, well, so, okay, with all this in mind, when do you think we'll see overland supersonic flight? I said, okay, so I put together my chart. I make the assumption that they'll complete the X-59 studies flights over these 6 communities by 2027. Let's assume we get community acceptance. But let's assume there's less signature variability from the turbulence and signatures. And let's assume that the transition focus and climb boom levels, they're resolved so that, we can make it. Okay, so the FAA gets it maybe 8 years later. It's awful optimistic, I think. Anyhow, in 2035, I said they write a rule and they also write a procedure for certification. And let's go even further and assume that ICAO members, will also buy into this. By that time, then, the propulsion guys will say, okay, now we'll get serious about committing to designing engines for business jets and SSTs. Well, last I recall, it took about 10 years and $1 billion to build and certify an engine. So let's say that gets done in 2045, and that engine, and combined with the airframe, it's such that it's going to meet airport community noise rules. So production of these vehicles will start in 5 years, and maybe the flights begin a year after that. So 2050 is my guesstimate. It's when we'll see overland supersonic flight. Now, I've been accused of being too pessimistic. I think I'm too optimistic. But be that doesn't mean it. Let's see what these numbers mean in terms of the new entries. Well, there are three new entries. Boom Technology, who is located in Colorado, Arion in Las Vegas, and Spico Space, I think it's in Boston. Okay. This is a supersonic transport. These are supersonic business jets. Okay. This is the only one designed, which claims, for overland supersonic flight. This fellow here is going to fly over land, but he's going to fly at what's called Cutoff Mach number. It means that his speed over the ground has to be less than the speed of sound at the ground, so the boom doesn't reach there. Well, on the standard day, the Mach cutoff is like Mach 116. Okay. Overture is talking about a 55, 75 passenger airplane, 175 feet long, Mach 22, it's got to go faster than Concorde, in a range of 4,500 nautical miles here. They have what they call a baby boom, which is going to be a vehicle that probably will fly maybe next year, and it's going to be used to investigate the low speed, high speed characteristics that would feed into the final design of Overture. These are both 3-engine airplanes, and it's designed to fly mainly over water. Arion is a business jet, 8 to 12 passengers, Mach 1.4, again, a range of 45, 50, and he's got 6,200 mile range at Mach 1.6 with a gross weight of 115,000 pounds, but I think it's pretty amazing anyhow. So let's just take a look at the interior of this particular vehicle. Here we show it up here, daytime, nighttime. It's pretty plush. Here's Concorde. Okay, Concorde seating 100 passengers. And here they are wining and dining for about an hour of a 3.5-hour flight with lobster, steak, and champagne. Let me talk a little about Concorde and some of the implications that may end up on the new entries and those to come. Concorde was conceived in the early 50s. First flight in '69 is 200 feet long, 400 pounds, 1,000 passengers, Mach 2. 20 were built, 6 prototypes, and they hoped to sell 14, didn't sell one. So they assigned 7 to British Airways, 7 to Air France. First flights in '76, British went from London to Bahrain, and Air France went from Paris to Rio de Janeiro. Last flight was the crash in Paris in 2003. Now, as far as the total flight hours for these 14 vehicles over 27 years, 240,000, quite low compared to subsonic. But look at supersonic. We're talking about 80,000 hours supersonic. That's more time than all of the supersonic airplanes in the DoD inventory had. It was a technology marvel. The financial success, no. Why? High operating maintenance costs, high ticket costs, high fuel usage, executive airport community noise, excessive, and continued government subsidy. But the big culprit was low utilization because he couldn't fly over land because of the unacceptable sonic boom is limited to over water. Well, with his range, it meant the Atlantic, and there isn't so many flights you can make back and forth across the Atlantic in a day to really make money. So how might this impact the current fellows and maybe future ones? Let's take a look at the proposed worldwide supersonic route that Spike Aerospace proposes. Here we're looking at flights out of New York, eastbound, southbound, and westbound. Likewise, out of LA, eastbound, southbound, and westbound. Notice that most all of them fly over land. Let's look at the picture if you say you're not allowed to fly over land. Well, I've kind of white out wiggly sort of a way those routes that are over land that aren't going to be permitted. So what you have out of New York is you have the same, London to Paris and maybe to Casablanca. You might get away with a few to South America, but you might have to go subsonic here. Westbound, you lost everything eastbound. You may have one southbound, and you have some that are, of course, westbound. So it's a message here, too. One is you really have to have permission to fly over land. So you got the design for low boom. The other is these aircraft are going to have ranges in excess of 6,000 miles. Look, from LA to Tokyo is 5,500 nautical miles. To Sydney, Australia, it's 65. And to Singapore, it's 75. So, to all of the young engineers out there, lots of challenges. Okay, let me just make some closing remarks. First of all, there's some things that just addressed. We've touched on the beginning and end of the N-wave era. We introduced the beginning of the low boom shaped signature area. We showed how to do that. We were informed of the research priorities that would allow for civil overland supersonic flight. And we introduced the X-59 and its purpose and identified remaining challenges. In my own personal comment, I've always believed in commercial supersonic travel. I cannot believe that we're destined to forever only fly at Mach 10. It can't be. I think approval for overland civil supersonic operation will be realized. And finally, I believe that talent of this generation and the next will find a solution to the current challenges and those yet to be identified. So, questions or comments, and I thank you for your patience. Okay, Rick? No, I'm not getting that. I'm not hearing you, Rick.
I'm sorry. Sorry,
Okay, I got
talking.
you.
So,
Got you now.
okay. I just want to remind everyone to hit the Q&A button to put in your questions if you have some. So I'll go for the first one here. It says, how do we calculate the perceived sound decibel from the ground pressure signature?
Well, there, NASA Langley has put together a program that does it. For what it does is it takes the spectrum of that signature, okay, and based on the work that a gentleman named Stevens did some years ago, they weight the frequencies in terms of the ear response to the loudness of each of those. And so anytime you see, a signature, well, for example, the difference between an N wave and a sine wave, I mean, you really like to have a vehicle that has something that's sinusoidal because you have fewer higher frequencies. The calculations weight heavily high frequency, okay, in any kind of signature. And that's why you do the shaping and you have the rise times in there.
Okay, great. Another question was, what is the average Mach cutoff? Did you say 1.06?
No, in the standard atmosphere with no winds, okay, if you fly above the tropopause, which is 36,000 feet, you can fly at Mach 1.6 and the boom will never reach the ground, okay? As you go lower in altitude, that Mach cutoff, of course, decreases. I mean, if you went down to 20,000 feet, maybe the Mach cutoff is like 1.05. I'd have to look that up, but I think that's probably right. Now, if you're flying, and you would be flying above the tropopause if you're going to fly some sort of a business jet or a supersonic transport. So if you're flying above the tropopause and you happen to have, say, a 100-knot headwind, you're going to be indicating like Mach 1.3. So if you were going from New York to LA and you had headwinds, you'd be going 1.3. If you're going from LA to New York, you might be down to 1.05 there. But more basic than that, flying in the region, transonic region, is not good. Airplane engines, airplanes just don't like to fly there. That's a bad place to fly. It's just not good aerodynamically. But in addition to that, when you fly across the U.S., you have to make sure that you have variations in sea level elevation. You got mountains, you got people living on, so you have to have some sort of a buffer. In other words, you say, hey, today I can fly at Mach number 1.17. You have to leave a little edge there in case there's some change in the atmosphere. So pretty soon you're flying pretty close to the Mach 1 condition, which is not good. I mean, I'm not for it. And I don't know that it's ever going to be. But anyhow, that's the story.
Okay. There's a question here. It says, why was a replacement for the Concorde never built?
Oh, basically the engine. Basically the engine. An engine for supersonic really wants to be a straight turbojet. An engine, to make the noise level, wants to be a high bypass ratio. Okay. You can find maybe a mix in between, a bypass ratio maybe 2 or 3. But the engines on the subsonic airplanes today are really up to 10. You're getting more fan thrust in your, thrust out of the exhaust system. So that's been the big hang up in there. They talk variable cycle engines where you have pretty much a high bypass fan engine on takeoff and climb out to make the noise, and then you'd go back pretty much to a straight turbojet during cruise. But I think that was the reason, and that's the reason you probably don't see supersonic business jets, because I think that's the first we'll see, and we'll probably see it from the Japanese, I'm going to guess. Okay.
Okay. There's one more question. It's more of a opinion. It says, any comments on the point-to-point travel that promises New York City to Shanghai in 40 minutes? I know that's been talked about over time. I think it's suborbital, point-to-point.
Yeah, there's, of course, there's talk of hypersonics. And, to do hypersonics, you have to go through supersonics. You're still going to have the same concerns as far as airport noise and sonic boom. When you talk hypersonics, you got to talk long range. I mean, if you're going to go halfway around the world, you got to be talking about, a little over 11,000 miles in there. That's a heck of a range for an airplane nonstop. Besides that, it's got to fly above 90,000 feet, so you've got some problems. With the SST, there was a problem if you flew at 60,000, which they don't want to fly anymore because that's where the concentration of ozone is in there. But if you flew at 60,000 and you had a failure, you had to be able to get that airplane down to 20,000 feet where you could breathe, in 90 seconds. Well, when you're looking at the SST, they could put that thing in the dive with all four engines and they weren't able to make it. So you have concerns of that sort. Let's face it, our chaps that are going up in, even in the SR-71, you had to have a pressure suit, when you went above, above the 80,000 feet in there. So it's going to be a tough sell. And I can see hypersonics for the military. I really can't see hypersonics for civil transport, because how many trips are you going to make a day with that kind of vehicle? So many vehicles are going to have in there. So, but getting back to supersonics, let's take Boone's transport they're building. Well, they don't have the range to go from LA to the markets, in the Pacific basin there. So maybe they stop in Hawaii, and then launch out of there. But I would think that anybody that's going to buy a ticket on supersonic transport really doesn't want to make a stop anywhere. They just want to get to where they're going from where they're leaving. So as I say, range is going to be a big factor in terms of the success of any supersonic civil transport system. Okay.
Okay, great. I think that was all the questions that I saw pop up. Oh, of course, I spoke too soon. Let's see. Why were those unconventional configurations abandoned?
Well, it turns out that most of the studies found that what you had to do to end up with the signatures that they said would result, you end up paying a big penalty, either in terms of weight or in terms of fuel burned or whatever. They're not, such offers are not abandoned. And in fact, I think NASA always keeps an open mind. I know I do, on those that come in and say, hey, I've got to wait, because, you're liable to say no to somebody and then find out years later that, yeah, it happened. Like the patent, the patent office many, many years ago said that that's probably the end of all of the inventions we'll ever see in there. But there is an outfit in California that's proposing how to minimize the sonic boom. But here again, usually the configurations are not going to be very aerodynamic. So you have to take into consideration, the job they're supposed to do in terms of performance. They're not discouraged.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, great. Well, I think that was the last question. Thank you very much for your excellent talk. I know a lot of people appreciated it and a lot of good content there. So we'll be posting the recording up on Engage to remind everyone that's still here. And thank you very much again, Dom.
And thank you, and thank to everybody.
All right, bye.
Bye-bye.